My name is Rowan Ellis. I am 31 years old, and when I walked out of my parents' rental cabin last Saturday night, my hands were so steady it frightened me. I had just watched my father cry, my mother apologize, and my brother refuse to look at me. I had a file folder pressed against my ribs, like a rib of its own, and outside, the snow was doing that quiet, sideways thing that Vermont snow does when it wants you to notice it. I sat in my car for 11 minutes before I turned the key. I know it was 11 because I looked at the dashboard clock when I sat down, and again when I finally moved. In those 11 minutes, I did not cry. I did not shake. I only ran a fingernail along the edge of the folder, back and forth, until the cardstock warmed. Let me tell you how we got there. 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother, Colleen, sent a message to the family thread. She said Dad's shoulder surgery had wiped out their savings, that the property tax bill had come in higher than expected, and that they simply couldn't do Christmas this year. She said it broke her heart. She used the word broke 3 times in one paragraph, which I remember thinking was a strange word to lean on when the point was money. My older brother, Ford, responded within 4 minutes. He said he understood, that he and his wife Marisol would drop off a lasagna, and that the kids were disappointed but resilient. My younger sister, Della, sent a string of crying emojis and a photograph of her cat wearing a Santa hat. I typed and deleted 3 replies before landing on the one that felt like me. I offered to cover Christmas dinner. I offered to bring groceries, pay for a caterer, host at my place in Burlington, or just quietly Venmo them what they needed. Mom refused each one. She said accepting help would make them feel like a burden. She said, and I still remember this exactly because I read it 4 times. We just need 1 quiet year, Rowan. Please let us have that. I let them have it. I want you to understand who I am before I tell you what I found. I work as a forensic accounting analyst for an insurance recovery firm. My job, when I strip away the polite phrasing on my business card, is to look at a family's financial records after a fire, a flood, or a death, and determine which of the losses they claimed actually happened. I have spent 9 years learning that people who are hiding something almost always leave a rhythm behind. Not a smoking gun, a rhythm. A pattern in the timing of transfers. A round number where a jagged one should be. A receipt for a meal at a restaurant that was closed for renovations the week it was allegedly eaten. My hands know that rhythm before my mind catches up. That skill had exposed contractor fraud, staged burglaries, and one very elaborate boat sinking. It was about to expose my mother. Before I take you back to where this started, I want to know something. What time is it where you are right now? What's the weather doing outside your window? Because I remember exactly what the sky was doing the night I let myself see it. Some moments burn the clock into your memory, and this whole story hinges on one of those moments. Growing up, we were the kind of middle class that always felt like it was one bad tire away from something worse. Dad, Terrence, worked at a paper mill until it closed when I was 14. After that, he did a mix of things that never quite added up to a career. Mom did the books for a dental office in town for 26 years. Ford, 5 years older than me, was the son. Della, 6 years younger, was the baby. I was the middle, the useful one, the one who did well in school and stayed out of trouble, because trouble in our house had a way of getting handed to whoever was closest to Mom's kitchen. I paid for my own college. I paid for my own car. I paid for my own certifications. When Dad had his first shoulder surgery 7 years ago, I paid for the physical therapy copays because Mom said the deductible had wiped out their checking account. When Ford and Marisol had their second baby and needed a bigger car, I gave them $4,000 toward the down payment and told Mom to keep it between us. When Della decided to try cosmetology school, then culinary school, then a certificate in medical billing, I paid for the entry fees each time because Mom said she was almost there, almost, just this last thing. The running total, when I finally sat down and added it up on the drive back to Burlington, was more than $61,000 over 9 years. But I didn't know that yet. On the 3rd Sunday of December, I only knew I loved my parents, and I believed them when they said they were tired. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment. I made a small roast chicken because I like the smell of one in the oven. I lit 2 candles on the coffee table. I watched half of an old movie and fell asleep on the couch with my socks on. Around 10, my phone buzzed. It was Marisol. My sister-in-law and I are not close, but we're not close either. She's a labor and delivery nurse, and she treats every conversation like a triage. Her message said, "Are you okay?" I said I was fine, just tired. She wrote back, "I just wanted to check. Colleen said you didn't feel comfortable coming tonight." I sat up so fast the blanket slid off my knees. I asked her to explain. She said Mom had told her, Ford, and everyone else who came to the cabin that afternoon, that Rowan needed space this year, that Rowan was going through something, that we shouldn't push. I read that message twice. Then I asked, very carefully, who was at the cabin. Marisol went quiet for 11 minutes. When she came back, she said, "Rowan, I think you should look at Della's Instagram." I opened Della's page and there it was. A story posted 40 minutes earlier. The cabin's living room, decorated in white pine garlands and gold ribbon. A tree taller than my father, hung with ornaments I had never seen in that house. A long table set for 14, prime rib, a cheese board the size of a coffee table. My cousin Beatrice, whom I hadn't seen in 3 years, laughing next to a man I didn't recognize. And in the corner of the frame, my mother, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater I did not know she owned, holding a champagne flute up toward the camera. The caption read, "Family is everything." I did not react. I sat on the edge of the couch with my phone in one hand, and the other pressed flat against my thigh. I noticed that my father's shoulder, the one that had supposedly wiped out their savings, was lifting a heavy tray of appetizers in the background of the next story. I noticed the caterer's van parked outside in the 3rd story, and I zoomed in on the logo. I noticed a Nordman fir Christmas tree with a foil tag still stapled to a lower branch, and I knew from Marisol's holiday post 2 years ago that a real Nordman of that size from the farm out near Middlebury ran about $340. I noticed a stack of red envelopes on the sideboard that looked like the ones Dad's family used to hand out cash gifts. My anger did not arrive. Something colder did. I was already counting. 14 place settings, 1 caterer, real tree, envelopes, cashmere, champagne. The math was starting to run on its own and I hadn't asked it to. I want to name something here, because it matters. The irony was that I had spent my entire career learning to spot the exact pattern I had been living inside. 9 years of catching people who used the language of hardship to redirect other people's generosity, and I had personally financed my own mother's fraud because she said the word broke 3 times in a paragraph, and I did not want to hurt her feelings by asking for a bank statement. I could have found this in an afternoon, any afternoon. I had chosen not to look because looking would have required me to know. I called Marisol back. I asked her a very specific question. I asked her when the invitations had gone out. She said she had received hers on the 28th of November. Almost a full week before Mom's message to the family thread announcing that Christmas was canceled. I asked her if Ford had known that I was not invited. There was a long pause. She said Colleen had told Ford that I had asked for a quiet Christmas because of stress at work, and that we should respect it. She said Ford had felt bad but had believed our mother. She said, "Rowan, I'm so sorry. I should have called you sooner. I've been sick about this since I walked in." I told her not to say anything to anyone yet. I told her to enjoy her lasagna and her champagne and her prime rib. I told her I loved her. Then I hung up, opened my laptop, and started pulling every joint statement, every Venmo record, every check I had written to my parents in the last 5 years. I did not sleep that night. By 3 in the morning, I had a spreadsheet with 42 line items, cross-referenced against my mother's stated reasons for each request. By 5, I had the second cold thing happen in my chest. I was looking at a specific entry from April of the previous year. A check I had written for $8,000, made out to my mother. Memo line, Dad's PT and specialist copays. The check had been deposited into an account ending in 4471. My father's shoulder surgery from that spring had been in-network, and I had accidentally seen the explanation of benefits when I was helping Mom sort paperwork in June. His total out-of-pocket for the year had been just under $1,200. I stopped scrolling. Something inside me became very still. I had not been paying for physical therapy. I had been paying for something else, and I did not yet know what. The next morning, I did not call my mother. I called the number on the back of one of the checks I had written her 3 years earlier, the bank where account 4471 lived. I asked, as her authorized signer on a joint elder care account she had set up when Dad was first sick, for the last 5 years of statements. They arrived as encrypted PDFs by that evening. I spent the 26th of December, a Sunday, on the floor of my living room, with those statements printed out in a semicircle around me. What I found made my hands go cold. Money I had sent for Dad's medical costs had, in a consistent rhythm, been transferred within 72 hours to a second account. Not to my father's providers, to a wealth management firm in Stowe. I recognized the name because 2 of my clients had used them. I called the firm on Monday morning, under the guise of being a prospective client, and asked general questions about their minimums. Then I called Priya Vance, an attorney I had worked with on 2 recovery cases. Priya specialized in family financial abuse of adult children, which is a specialty I did not know existed until she told me it did. She took my case pro bono because, in her words, she saw something in my voice she had heard before. She told me to do 3 things: preserve everything, confront no one, and request from my father's HR office a copy of his final pension disbursement documents, which I had power of attorney to access because Mom had made me sign paperwork years ago when Dad's memory was briefly a concern. Those documents arrived 4 days later. My father had not lost his pension in the mill closure. He had received a lump sum buyout of $182,000 in 2011, 3 years before he told me the mill had left him with nothing. That money had been rolled into an account at the firm in Stowe. It had grown. Over the following 12 years, it had grown into just over $400,000. And every dollar I had sent for medical expenses, tuition emergencies, car repairs, and property taxes had been fed into it like kindling. My parents were not broke. They had been quietly, patiently, and deliberately using my income as a savings mechanism so their principal could compound untouched. I've shown you what I found. Now let me show you what I did with it. But before I do, tell me where you are watching from. I want to know how many people are in the room the moment I sat down at that cabin table with a folder in my lap. I gathered 4 types of evidence: the bank statements from account 4471, showing the transfers; the pension disbursement records from Dad's former employer; the account statements from the firm in Stowe, which I obtained through Priya after we established that as Dad's power of attorney, I had standing to request them; and the invitation records from the caterer, which turned out to be the almost correct flaw that broke the whole story open. The caterer's contract had been signed on the 14th of November. The signature block was in my mother's name, but the deposit had been paid from an account whose routing number, when I looked it up, did not belong to the joint account she claimed to be draining. It belonged to the Stowe account. She had paid for the Christmas party, the one she had told me she could not afford, directly out of the investment account she had been building with the money I sent her for my father's physical therapy. The routing number was correct for the bank. The account number was 1 digit off from the joint account she had emailed me a year earlier. Anyone else would have missed it. My hands knew before I did. There was a 5th thing. I called the wealth management firm one more time, this time as the authorized signer under Dad's power of attorney, and asked for the list of authorized users on the account. There were 3: my father, my mother, and my brother, Ford. Not Della. Not me. Ford had been added as a joint authorized user in 2019. I want to say something about Marisol here, because she matters. When I told her what I had found, she did not defend her husband. She asked me one question. She asked, how much of it did he know? I told her I didn't know yet, she said. Then I need to find out, and I need to do it before you sit down with them. She called me back 3 days later. She said Ford had known about the account since 2019. He had not known about the transfers from my payments. He had believed the growth came from Dad's investments. When Marisol showed him the timing on the transfers, he sat on their kitchen floor for an hour and did not speak. She said he was ashamed. She said he wanted to come with me to the cabin. I said no. I said this had to happen at the table, where they had eaten prime rib without me. I said Ford could come, but he had to sit and listen. He agreed. Marisol told me later that he cried in the car on the way there. I don't know if that matters. I'm still deciding. I called my mother on the 2nd of January and asked if I could come to the cabin the following Saturday to talk. She said of course, and could I bring a dessert? I said I would bring what was needed. I did not elaborate. She heard warmth in my voice, because that is what she was trained to hear. I had not decided yet whether I was capable of being cruel. I have decided since that I am not, but I came close. The Saturday I arrived, the cabin still had the tree up. The garlands were still on the mantel. The place settings had been cleared, but the good tablecloth was still on the dining table, and I noticed a wine stain near where my mother had been sitting in Della's Instagram story. I set the folder on the table. Mom came out of the kitchen with a plate of shortbread. Dad was in his recliner, favoring the shoulder he had lifted trays with 2 weeks earlier. Della was on her phone in the corner. Ford arrived 12 minutes late with Marisol, who did not sit down. Mom said, "What's the folder, sweetheart?" I said, "It's some paperwork." She said, "Should your father and I be worried?" I said, "You should be honest." I opened the folder and I did not raise my voice once. I laid down the caterer's invoice with the routing number circled. My mother's face did a thing I had never seen it do. It did not go red. It went slack. I laid down the account statement from Stowe. My father made a small sound, like air being let out of a cushion. I laid down the pension disbursement document from 2011. He looked at my mother. She said, "Rowan, honey, this is complicated." I said, "It's actually not." She tried 3 things. First, she said I was misunderstanding, that the account was for emergencies, that she had always intended to give it to us kids when they were gone. I asked her why my name was not on the authorized user list. She said she'd meant to add me. I asked when. She could not answer. Second, she said I was being cold, that I had always been the child who kept score, that she and Dad had raised 3 children and only one of them had turned into someone who arrived at a family table with a folder. She looked at Ford when she said this, expecting backup. Ford did not look up. Third, she said the party had been Della's idea, that Della had been struggling and needed something to look forward to, that they had been trying to protect Della from feeling like a failure. I looked at Della. Della was crying without sound, which is a thing she has done since she was 6. I said the only sentence I had planned to say. I said, "You used my father's medical care as a cover story to grow an account you never intended to share with me, and then you excluded me from a celebration that my labor paid for." I did not add anything. I let the sentence sit there on the tablecloth next to the wine stain. My mother said, after a long silence, "That is not how we thought about it." I believed her. That is the worst part. I believed she had never thought about it in a sentence that clean. The confirming witness was not someone I had brought. It was my Aunt Nell, my father's older sister, who had let herself in through the back door during our exchange without any of us noticing. Aunt Nell is 73, a retired probate paralegal, and she had been the one who told my father in 2011 to put the pension buyout somewhere it could grow. She had assumed, for 12 years, that I knew. She stepped into the dining room, and she said, quietly, "Terrence, does she really not know?" My father did not answer. Aunt Nell sat down at the table without being asked. She said to me, "I have my own copies of every quarterly statement since 2013. Your father asked me to review them each year. I can send them to you tonight." She looked at my mother when she said this. My mother's shortbread plate began to tremble in her hand. Aunt Nell said, "Colleen, I am so disappointed." That was all. Ford spoke then. He said he had known about the account, but not about how it had grown. He said he had let himself not ask. He said he was sorry. He said he would sign whatever needed to be signed to make it right. His voice was thin, the way voices get when a person is discovering their own complicity in real time. I did not forgive him. I nodded. That was all I had for him that night. In the weeks that followed, I let the consequences unfold without touching them. I did not post anything. I did not call any relatives. I sent Priya's letter to my parents, formally requesting an accounting of the transfers going back to 2015 and proposing that a portion of the Stowe account be transferred to a trust in my name and Della's, since Della had never been part of the arrangement and had grown up believing our family was as broke as our mother said. Dad agreed within a week. Mom held out longer. The consequences arrived in their own time. Aunt Nell sent her statements to Priya, which made denial impossible. The wealth management firm, once a formal request was made regarding the origin of certain deposits, opened a review that resulted in the freezing of my mother's independent authorization, pending clarification. Dad, whose name was primary on the account, retained access, but Mom's ability to move money without his signature was suspended. The caterer contacted my mother because a check for the balance of the Christmas party had bounced when the account holds took effect. My mother had to explain, to a caterer she had wanted to impress, that there had been a family issue. Ford and Marisol separated for a month in February. They are back together now, in counseling, which Marisol tells me is going well and is also very hard. Ford transferred $4,000 to my account without a note, which I assume was the down payment for the second car I had helped them with years ago. I did not respond. I have not decided yet whether to keep it or send it back. That's the honest answer. Della was the one who surprised me. Della, whom I had assumed knew everything because she had been at the party, actually had not known about the account at all. She had believed our parents were broke. She had believed the party was a small miracle Mom had pulled together with a bonus from her dental office. When she saw the statements Priya sent over, she went to my parents' house and stayed for 4 hours, and when she came out she called me. She said, "Rowan, I have been the reason for so much of this." I told her she had not been the reason. She had been the excuse. Those are different. She asked if she could come to Burlington the following weekend. She did. She slept on my couch and we did not talk about our parents for 2 days. On the third day, she asked if I would help her build a real budget. She had never had one. She was 35. We sat at my kitchen table, and I built her one, and she cried when she saw how close she actually was to being fine. She is not fine yet. She is closer. That is the sort of small, brave thing that does not fix a family but does something else. My mother sent me a letter in March, handwritten, 3 pages. She said she had spent 30 years believing that being a good mother meant hiding the truth about money from her children so they would not worry. She said somewhere along the way that turned into hiding the truth about money, from me specifically, so that I would keep providing. She said she had not seen the transition. She said she was sorry. She said she understood if I needed time. She did not ask me to forgive her. That was the part that surprised me, and it is the part that made me put the letter in a drawer instead of the recycling. I want to tell you what I did with the money I stopped sending. For 9 years I had told myself I would take a real trip when things settled down. Somewhere, with mountains that were not the mountains I grew up staring at. In May, I flew to Patagonia. I had wanted to go since I was 19 and read a book about it in a used bookstore in Montpelier. I hiked for 11 days with a small group of strangers who did not know anything about me, except my name and my job. On the 6th day, we crossed a hanging bridge over a river the color of glacial milk, and I stood in the middle of it for longer than I needed to, because no one was waiting for me on either side, and no one needed anything from me, and the wind was doing something to the light that felt like being told a secret. I came home lighter in a way I did not know I had been heavy. Here is what I've thought about since. Silence, in a family, is a currency. It is spent as often as money. My mother spent mine for 30 years without asking, and I let her, because the alternative was noticing, and noticing would have required me to say something out loud that would have made her uncomfortable. There is a difference between loyalty and obedience, and I did not know the difference until I saw a routing number one digit off from the one I had been trained to trust. Loyalty asks questions. Obedience assumes it already knows the answers. I had been obedient. I had called it loyalty because it hurt less. The other thing I've thought about is that consequences are not revenge. When my mother's authorization was suspended, when the caterer's check bounced, when Ford sat on his kitchen floor, none of that came from me. It came from the arithmetic of what had actually happened, arriving finally at the door of the people who had authored it. I did not send those consequences. I stopped intercepting them. That is a different thing, and it took me most of a spring to understand the difference. Last Saturday, I drove back to the cabin. Not the one with the wine stain, a different one. I rented a small place on a lake outside of Waitsfield for the first weekend of December, and I invited Aunt Nell, Della, Marisol, and 2 friends from work. I made a small roast chicken, because I like the smell of one in the oven. I lit 2 candles on the table. It snowed sideways, the way Vermont snow does when it wants you to notice it. After dinner, I stood on the porch by myself for a minute. I looked at my hands in the porch light. They were steady. Not frighteningly steady. Just steady. The dashboard clock in my head had stopped counting. The folder was in a drawer at home, closed. If you are still watching, I want to ask you one thing. Looking back at the beginning of your own version of this story, was there a moment when you already knew and chose to call it something else? Because I think most of us have one. And I think the day you stop calling it something else is the day the account stops growing without you. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.